Well, hello, and welcome to another installment of Bottles That Changed the World, the little series where we talk about bottlings that were hugely important, hugely impactful, or at least firsts, and that are still around and available and really good, but have kind of just the hype is gone. They're not really noticed in the common landscape. But here we are going to try to recover these things and give them a little bit of the love they deserve. And what are we doing today? Last time was Appleton. Last time was Jamaican rum. This time, we're going to San Francisco. We're going to talk about Old Potrero from, formerly from the Eckert Distilling Company, and nowadays from Hotaling & Co. They had to change the name after Kyaru bought the beer company. And so this is a story of a gentleman named Fritz Maytag. Fritz Maytag of the washing machine company family, of the blue cheese people. That Maytag. Fritz basically moved to San Francisco in the 60s to buy up the Anchor Brewing Company, so Anchor Steam Beer, those guys, when they were failing. He bought it up and he kind of rehabilitated it, and it became this big hub of craft beer. So craft beer really owes a little bit to Fritz. But then something happened in 1993, which is when Fritz went up to a bunch of employees and basically said, why don't we make a whiskey? Context. Let us talk about the history of American craft distilling in the post-war period. So it really... So, to my knowledge, someone correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, things really started to take off a little bit. Not take off. A couple of things were founded in the early to mid-'80s. You had Germain Robin and St. George started in 82 or so, and a couple of others, notably Clear Creek, around, I think, 85, 86, somewhere in there, up in Oregon. So, West Coast stuff. And predominantly focusing on brandies. They really wanted to make fruit brandies, grapey brandies. That was the vision over there, because there was just a lot of cheap fruit around in California and the Pacific Northwest back in the early and mid 80s. So not a lot of focus on grain spirits or whiskey. That changed with Anchor. They started distilling a rye whiskey. So basically, I think Fritz wanted to make kind of a reproduction of historical American whiskey. And they went with rye, and then went with single malt, because you're talking the 90s, single malt scotch is starting to get popular. So you have this very interesting labeling. Actually, it isn't on here, but it's they're very early labels. They say not just straight rye whiskey, but single malt rye whiskey, which is a little bit misleading because it's not barley, it's malted rye. It's a different kind of thing. Anyhow, so they started making this stuff around 94. First release was 96. So it must have been a year and change old. And you have to remember the context of this. This rye came out the same year as McCarthy's single malt, the first release of that from Clear Creek, which is the first, actual malted barley American single malt. And that was, remember, sort of sourced from Port Ellen malting. So it wasn't even really American barley. This is American-grown rye. It was malted and then pot distilled in San Francisco, in this tiny, tiny little cave that they had back then. Since then, they've added a lot more stills. They do gin and giniver and some other stuff too. And they've really become more of like an importing business these days. Anyways, moving on. This thing is not only probably the first big American craft whiskey alongside McCarthy's, and St. George's around that same time, I believe, as well. Predating everyone. Like Pritchard's is a couple of years after this, maybe 97, 98, they were founded. First whiskey a couple of years after that. You had Stranahan's, like I think in the 2000s. So you had things kicking up after this, but this is really like where craft whiskey in the U.S. starts, right here. This bottle, I mean, not this bottle. This is a Binny's pick, but that release, that was it. And it was like this. They were putting out a 100% rye whiskey, like 10, at least a decade, more like a decade and a half before rye started to become a thing. Like, they were way ahead of the curve, and I feel like they deserve some appreciation for that. Like, this is ground zero for craft whiskey, and it is a good ground zero. I have to imagine the original 96 release was a little bit raw. This is not, though. I mean, it just smells like a rhubarb pie smothered in delicious American oak. It's just drop a bunch of like vanilla and honey and dried cherry on top of your rhubarb pie. That's pretty much what this smells like. And it's just lovely. It doesn't get a lot of hype these days. But the upshot of that is you're likely to see these things on end of bin shelves, and if you see them, they are worth a grab. They're special. Ooh, peppery boy. Yeah, so there you go. Eckert Distilling, now Hotaling, and Old Potrero. Really the ground zero for American craft whiskey distilling. We shall, in another installment of these episodes, I'll probably talk about St. George and all those guys as well. Anyways, thank you for watching. This is a bottle that changed the world. Cheers.